I used to think rock bottom would feel loud, like shattered glass, screaming, doors slamming. But when it finally came for me, it sounded like a coffee machine humming in an empty kitchen at 4:17 in the morning. That was the exact moment I realized my wife had taken the kids and left without saying goodbye. The house was too quiet. I remember standing there barefoot, still half asleep, staring at the note she left beside the sink. One sentence, no anger, no explanation. I can't do this anymore. That was it. No signature. No, I'm sorry, nothing. I must have read those 5 words 50 times before my brain accepted they were real. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, every room suddenly looked unfamiliar. My daughter's backpack was gone from the hallway hook. My son's cereal bowl wasn't in the sink. Even the framed family picture near the refrigerator had disappeared, leaving behind a clean square on the dusty wall. Like they had erased themselves carefully, like they'd planned it. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs and just sat there staring at nothing. My chest felt hollow, almost cold. The kind of cold that doesn't stay on your skin. It settles deeper. The worst part wasn't even the silence. It was that I understood why she left. 3 days earlier, I'd lost my job. 22 years at the same company. 22 birthdays missed because of overtime. 22 Christmas parties where they called us family. And it ended with a 15-minute meeting in a gray conference room, where my manager couldn't even look me in the eye. Budget restructuring. That was the phrase. Not thank you. Not we're sorry. Just 2 polished words that destroyed everything I'd spent half my life building. I remember carrying my cardboard box through the parking lot while younger employees avoided eye contact. One of them held the door open for me, with that awkward pity people give. When they're secretly relieved, it wasn't them. Inside the box was a coffee mug my daughter painted when she was 9. Best dad ever. The handle had cracked months ago, but I kept using it anyway. I threw it away at a gas station on the drive home. I don't know why. Maybe because somewhere deep down, I already knew things were falling apart. Claire tried to support me at first. That's the painful part. She really did try. The first night after I lost the job, she sat beside me on the couch and rubbed circles on my back while I stared blankly at the television. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. And I believed her. For a while. But unemployment changes the atmosphere. Inside a house. Slowly. Quietly. Like water leaking beneath a floorboard. At first it's invisible. Then one day everything starts warping. I stopped sleeping properly. Bills piled up on the counter. I spent mornings sending resumes into the void. And afternoons pretending not to notice. Claire checking our bank account when she thought I wasn't looking. Small things became arguments. The electric bill. Groceries. My son asking if he could still join his school trip. I started hearing disappointment in her silence. That's when the distance began. Not dramatic distance. Not movie-style screaming. Worse, polite distance. She stopped touching my arm when she walked past. Stopped asking how my day was. Stopped waiting up for me at night even though I was always home. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window with this exhausted expression I didn't recognize. Like she was mourning something that hadn't fully died yet. And maybe she was. The strange thing is, I don't blame her entirely. There's something humiliating about watching yourself become someone you promised you'd never be. I used to be dependable. The stable one. The father who fixed broken cabinet doors at midnight. The husband who remembered birthdays. The guy coworkers called when things went wrong. Then suddenly I was sitting in sweatpants at noon refreshing. My email every 5 minutes praying. Someone would answer an application. I could feel respect slipping away from me piece by piece. Not just hers. Mine too. A week after she left, I finally forced myself outside. I wandered for hours without really knowing where I was going. Downtown looked different during work hours when you no longer belonged there. Everyone moved with purpose except me. People in pressed shirts carried coffees and checked their watches while I drifted between them like a ghost. Eventually, I ended up in a small diner near the train station. The kind of place most people ignore. Flickering sign. Scratch tables. Old country music playing too softly through ceiling speakers. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and sat near the window pretending to read job listings on my phone. That's when the old man sat down across from me. He didn't ask permission. 1 second the booth was empty. The next, there he was lowering himself carefully onto the seat with a tired sigh. He looked about 70. Maybe older. Dark wool coat. Weathered hands. sharp gray eyes that somehow seemed both exhausted and fully awake at the same time. At first, I assumed he was confused. "Sorry," I muttered. "Someone sitting here?" He ignored the question. Instead, he glanced at the untouched plate in front of me. "You've been staring at those eggs for 10 minutes, he said calmly. "Either they offended you or your mind's somewhere else." His voice carried this strange steadiness to it. Not warm exactly, but grounded. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I almost laughed for the first time in weeks. "Mind's somewhere else," I admitted. He nodded like he already knew. Then he said something I still think about almost every day. "When a man loses his work," he said quietly, "he starts wondering if he's still visible." I looked up sharply. Something about the way he said it hit too close. He reached for the coffee pot on the table and poured himself a cup without asking. "You lose your job?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Family too?" That one landed harder. I stared at him for a long moment before answering. "My wife left, and the kids went with her." It wasn't a question. I felt irritation rise in my chest. "How do you know all that?" The old man smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it. "Because men wear loneliness the same way," he said. For some reason, I stayed. Maybe because nobody else had spoken to me like a human being in days, or maybe because he looked at me without pity. That mattered more than I realized. His name was Walter. Over the next hour, he talked very little about himself. Mostly he listened. Really listened. Not the fake kind where people wait for their turn to speak. The real kind. I found myself telling him things I hadn't even admitted aloud before. About losing the job, about Claire growing distant, about the fear that maybe my family had been happier the moment I disappeared from their daily lives. Walter never interrupted. Sometimes he'd just nod slowly while steam curled from his coffee cup. Before leaving, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. He slid it across the table toward me. "There's an address on that," he said. "Come tomorrow evening. 7 sharp." I frowned. "What is it?" "A place where people start over." I almost laughed. "Sounds cult-like." That earned the smallest smile from him. "Maybe it does." Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice something heavy settle behind his eyes. "But if you come," he said carefully, "pay attention to who speaks and who stays quiet." I looked down at the napkin. An address was written neatly in blue ink. No business name. No explanation. When I looked back up, Walter was already standing, and just before he turned away, he said the words that would keep me awake all night. "The people who save you," he murmured, "aren't always the people you should trust." I didn't sleep that night. Walter's words kept circling through my head like a song I couldn't turn off. "The people who save you aren't always the people you should trust." At 3 in the morning, I was still sitting on my couch staring at the folded napkin on the coffee table. I must have picked it up 20 different times, trying to decide whether I was desperate enough to actually go. By 6, I'd already convinced myself not to. By noon, I changed my mind again. That's what loneliness does to you. It lowers the volume on your instincts, makes strange things feel reasonable. The address led me to an old brick building on the edge of town near the riverfront warehouses. Nothing about it stood out. No sign, no logo, just a narrow entrance beneath a flickering outdoor light. I checked the number twice to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. Part of me hoped I had. Inside, the place smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Warm lights glowed against dark wooden walls. Maybe 15 people sat scattered around the room in quiet conversation. Some looked successful. Others looked broken. A woman in business clothes stared blankly into a cup of tea. A younger guy with tattooed hands bounced his knee nervously while pretending to read a newspaper. An older couple sat silently beside one another without touching. No one looked happy, but they all looked familiar somehow, like people carrying invisible damage. Walter appeared from a hallway in the back. "You came," he said simply. "I almost didn't. That usually means you needed to." He guided me toward a chair near the corner of the room. Nobody introduced themselves formally. Nobody pressured me to speak. They just nodded politely as if they already understood why I was there. The meeting started quietly. No microphones, no speeches. People simply talked. One by one, they shared pieces of their lives they apparently couldn't say anywhere else. A man described losing his restaurant after 30 years. A woman admitted she hadn't spoken to her son in almost a decade. Another confessed that after retiring, he realized his entire identity had depended on being needed by other people. There was no dramatic crying. No motivational nonsense. Just honesty. Raw honesty. And for the first time since losing everything, I didn't feel completely alone. Weeks passed. Then months. I kept returning every Thursday evening. The strange thing was, the group slowly became the only place where I felt visible again. Walter and I grew close. Closer than I expected. Sometimes after meetings, we'd walk along the river together while he smoked, cigarettes down to the filter, and talked about life in these oddly precise observations. People think betrayal arrives like lightning, he told me once. Truth is, it usually arrives politely. Another time, he said, loneliness makes us hand trust to whoever notices us first. At the time, those sentences sounded philosophical. Later, I realized they were warnings. Claire still barely answered my calls. When she did, conversations stayed painfully practical. School schedules, paperwork, bills. Nothing personal. One evening, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you happier now? There was a long silence on the phone. Then she said quietly, I'm less tired. That answer hurt more than anger would have. I found temporary work at a hardware supplier across town. The pay was terrible, but it gave structure to my days again. Slowly, little pieces of myself started returning. I laughed occasionally. Started shaving regularly, even cooked proper meals instead of eating cereal over the sink. Walter noticed all of it. You're standing straighter, he said one night. I shrugged. Guess I'm adjusting. No, he replied carefully. You're recovering. That's different. By then, I trusted him completely. That was my mistake. The first red flag was so small I nearly ignored it. One Thursday, I arrived early and accidentally overheard two group members arguing in the hallway. He can't keep bringing in people like this, one whispered sharply. They need help, the other replied. That's not what I mean. Their voices stopped when they noticed me. Both smiled too quickly afterward. Later that same evening, I noticed Walter watching me during the meeting. Not casually, studying me, evaluating me somehow. It unsettled me for reasons I couldn't explain. Then came the second red flag. I arrived at work one morning to find my manager waiting near the loading dock. He looked uncomfortable. We've got to let you go, he muttered. My stomach dropped instantly. What? Why? He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Corporate got some anonymous complaint. Said you had emotional instability issues. I stared at him. What are you talking about? He avoided eye contact. Look, I don't make the decisions. I felt that same hollow cold return to my chest, the exact same feeling from the conference room months earlier. Only this time felt stranger. Targeted. That evening, I told Walter everything. His reaction was immediate. Too immediate. That wasn't random, he said flatly. What do you mean? He leaned back slowly in his chair. Some people don't like seeing others recover, especially when suffering gave them control over you. I frowned. You think someone's targeting me? I think, he said carefully. You'd be surprised what desperate people are capable of. Something about the conversation left me unsettled. For the first time since meeting him, I went home feeling worse instead of better. That weekend, my daughter called unexpectedly. Just hearing her voice nearly broke me. Dad? Hey, sweetheart. You okay? I swallowed hard. Yeah, of course. There was hesitation on her end. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Mom says you've been spending time with dangerous people. I froze. What? She said some old man has been filling your head with things. I sat upright immediately. What old man? The one from the meetings. Every nerve in my body tightened. How does your mother know about Walter? Silence. Then my daughter answered softly. Because she knows him. I couldn't speak. The room suddenly felt too small. What do you mean she knows him? Another pause. Then came the sentence that shattered everything I thought I understood. She said, she met him before you lost your job. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. That's impossible. She said she didn't want to tell you yet. The call ended shortly after that, but I barely remember the rest. I sat motionless for nearly an hour afterward, trying to make sense of it. Walter had met Claire before my life collapsed? How? Why? The next Thursday, I drove to the meeting anyway. Part of me wanted an explanation. Another part of me was terrified I'd actually get one. When I entered the building, conversation stopped. Not completely, just enough. Walter stood near the back hallway watching me quietly, like he'd been expecting this moment. I walked straight toward him. "You knew my wife before we met." His expression didn't change. "Who told you that? Is it true?" For several seconds, he said nothing. Then slowly, he nodded. The room around me seemed to disappear. "What exactly is this place?" I whispered. Walter exhaled heavily and glanced around the room. Not nervous, resigned. Finally, he looked back at me with tired eyes. "It started as a support group," he said quietly. "And then?" His jaw tightened. "And then some people began using pain as a way to keep others dependent." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're saying this whole thing was planned?" "No," he said immediately. "Not at first." My chest tightened. "What does that mean?" Walter stepped closer, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that changed everything. "Your wife came to us months before you lost your job.